Well, hello, and welcome to another podcast. Now, in this one, this is a subject that I think about quite often, actually, because as somebody who supplies training and I charge for my training, the immediate comparison with anybody who offers training, or one of the questions that comes up is, why should I pay for training for photography when there's lots of free stuff on YouTube? So why would I pay rather than just get a lot of free stuff? And partly this was prompted by the podcast that I recorded last week with Hiru. If you were listening to that, this is something that we actually spoke about in the course of our conversation about how people learn and the best way to teach people photography. So in this podcast, I'm going to talk a bit about what the differences are from my perspective between getting stuff on YouTube and using a structured photography course. And I am very interested in what your thoughts and comments are. So you're very welcome to comment on the video. I look forward to that. Or you can email me directly on graham@ge.photography, so the usual email address. So let's just dive in. So I'm going to just start by looking at YouTube videos, because that's something we're all familiar with, I think, and I've certainly used them and made use of them. And I think probably all of us who are into photography have jumped on YouTube with a question about how to do something at some point and got an answer. So first of all, what are the pluses? Well, accessibility is a big one because it's just there. In fact, if you didn't know, YouTube is the biggest search engine after Google. So Google and YouTube are both pretty massive. They are used millions, possibly billions of times a day, but they're very, very popular. So if you are somebody who's jumped on YouTube with a question, you are certainly not alone. So the first thing is it's very accessible. And with everybody who delivers content, and obviously I'm one of those people, if you're listening to this podcast on YouTube, I'm one of the people who is creating and delivering content, then there's an awful lot of stuff there that you can choose from. And of course, the other advantage is that it's free. You just jump on, you pick out the subject that you are interested in, you watch a video or you listen to a podcast, whatever it might be, and you're off. And the other thing is that there's a wide variety of different styles and different instructors. So I'm a believer that one size does not fit all. So, and in fact, something I feel very strongly about, if you're learning anything, it's really important to find an instructor or a coach, whoever it is, who you resonate with, whose style really works for you, because we don't work well with everyone, both as a trainer and as a trainee. So it's really important, certainly if you're going to invest money in training, that you find somebody whose style really resonates with you and things just click when they explain them. So that's another advantage of it. Another one is breadth of content. So there are tutorials, there are podcasts, there's content for pretty much everything. And in my podcast, they vary a little bit. So if you've been listening for a while, you'll know that I've done deeper dives anyway, into certain locations, into different animals, into various aspects of photography, into planning, things to think about with wildlife photography. I have guests on from time to time to talk about their experience. So even within the podcast that I produce, there's a variety. And obviously going out beyond that, there is a huge amount of variety with different people who might specialize in lighting, editing gear, how to pose people, whatever it might be. And there are lots and lots of rabbit holes you can disappear down. So that has pros, it has cons, but there's certainly a lot of content available at the tip of your fingers through your keyboard. Now, another thing that's positive about YouTube is that videos, podcasts are often quite entertaining. They're quite bite-sized. So, for example, with the podcasts I produce, I normally keep them between 20 to around 45 minutes. So the 45 obviously is a longer one. But the idea is that it's not a huge amount of information to take in. And even on my training modules, generally the videos that I produce, they're set up slightly differently to the podcast, but I keep those to about 20 minutes because I think when you're conveying information, as opposed to being information stroke entertainment, which is how I see the podcast, then you really want to keep the input of knowledge, if you like, down to a reasonable amount of time. And for me, 20 minutes is probably about the limit if it's purely about conveying information. So a lot of it is bite-sized, and it's a great place to go to get inspiration, to get new ideas. However, there are some limitations with YouTube. That is, there's no particular structure. Now, within a particular person's content, they may well be structure. Speaking for myself, again, if you look at my podcast, I tend to pop around all over the place. I did recently run a deeper dive into wildlife photography, which was 8 podcasts in sequence. So for 8 weeks, it was taking one aspect of wildlife photography and doing a little bit of a deeper dive. But that for me is very unusual. And I imagine, I haven't explored this extensively, but what I have seen is that most of the information you get is pretty much standalone. It's a single video, single podcast. But that does mean that these tend to lack a bit of structure. They can often be lessons that are scattered all over the place. And of course, another aspect, and this comes back to finding a good instructor, is that the quality varies dramatically. Because anybody, if you feel so inspired, you can just create some content and pop it on YouTube. There's absolutely no restrictions, no standards you have to meet, obviously within certain more kind of moral related things, that sort of thing. But in terms of if you were producing photography, no one cares. You just go on, you do what you do, and hope for the best, I guess. Another thing I find, and this was something that we did touch on very briefly in the last podcast, and that is the risk of always being in learning mode. And there's my phone. So the risk of always being in learning mode and never really progressing your skills. And this to me is a big problem, because the whole point of being on these things is to get better at photography. Otherwise, it is purely entertainment if you're not going to use it. So one of the things to, I guess, ask yourself, if you are a big YouTube user, is, are you able to actually apply what you're learning? And what I mean by that is, it's very easy to watch somebody just running through something on a video. It looks pretty straightforward. One of the things I find, particularly when I'm trying to, this is perhaps more often with IT, which I have to do an amount of, and I'm not really an IT sort of person. But what I find is, I get a video and they're telling me to go through here and click on this drop down menu and all of this kind of stuff. And of course, when you go to do it yourself, everything's different. And that becomes a bit of a struggle. So how much of it can you apply? How much of it are you applying? And there's an aspect to this that I will come back to when we get on to paid courses. So the really big thing is, are you progressing your skills? Are you getting information that you need to progress your photography? And is watching those videos making a difference to the results you're getting? And then the final aspect to YouTube is that it is the content and what you are likely to see. If you do a search, what is likely to come up in your listing? You'll have sponsored responses. And then the rest of it is very much algorithm driven. So it's not driven by curriculum in any sense of the word at all. It's purely on what's popular. So that might work for you, but the chances are it's gonna be very hit and miss. So if we move on to structured photography courses, what's the difference? Well, the first thing is that you've got a curriculum. Now, it might meet a standard, so you may well be trying to get a particular certification, in which case it will most definitely have to go through the different topics in a particular way, and you'll be assessed on your understanding of each part of that course. even if it isn't going for qualification, and this would certainly apply to my courses, the idea of the courses and the approach I've taken is I want to assume no knowledge at all. I'm going to take you from absolute basics, and we're basically going to go step by step to make sure, first of all, you understand all the fundamentals, and then we build on those. So there is a structure to it. It's a structure that is based on assuming nothing and then gradually building. So we put the building blocks in place, the foundation blocks, and then we build on top of that. And this is, in fact, a comment. It's a testimonial for one of my courses that somebody gave, who, and I think it was, she said that one of the things she liked about the course was that there were gaps in her knowledge that she didn't know she had. So it's that aspect of not knowing what we don't know. And because I'm going through fundamentals before I start building up on them, in that way, I'm making sure that there are no important gaps in your knowledge. So, for example, with exposure triangle, I make sure everybody understands that before we start getting into more creative stuff. So this, I think, is a big advantage of using a training course over something like YouTube. And it's because you can build that foundation before you move on to more advanced topics. And if you are just grabbing videos here and there from YouTube, if you don't know what you don't know, which, by definition we don't, you can perhaps get into a situation where you're getting very frustrated because you're trying to follow the steps in the video, but you're still not getting the results. Things still don't look right. Another thing you'll get with the course is a consistent teaching style. So again, as I've said before, you just need to make sure that that teaching style resonates with you, that you understand, you click, you make progress. And this is one important thing I would say if you're looking at courses is see if there is any kind of free trial period. And that's really to get a handle on how the person presenting is delivering the content. Because I'm sure you've experienced it, I think we all have, where we're really trying to understand something and it sort of doesn't matter how many times we go over it. It's just not clicking. And then we hear it from somebody else and all of a sudden it just drops into place. And that is what you want when you are doing a course, really of anything, but certainly with photography. Now, one of the really important things to me in a photography course is to have a lot of hands-on assignments. So in the course that I do, there's a very simple one on smartphone. There's a more complicated one, a deeper one on mirrorless and DSLR. And what I've done in the latter course is to make sure that at the end of each section, and if that's covering multiple things, like, for example, exposure triangle, there are hands-on exercises that you go through so you can implement what I've just explained to you. Because, and particularly with photography, to get really good at photography, it needs to be finger memory. It needs to be sort of body memory. You don't want to be thinking about where your fingers have to be to find the shutters, for example, if you're photographing an animal making a kill, to take a wildlife situation. And the only way you get that kind of instinctive connection with your camera is to practice, but you need to get the correct steps first. It's a bit like playing the guitar. If anyone's learned to play guitar, certainly when I first started, I just felt like I had a bunch of bananas at the end of each arm, and it was really hard to get them to do anything useful and make any kind of useful noise come out of this thing. But through practice, I gradually started to make a noise that started at least to sound a bit more musical, and the camera's the same. So it's really important that there are assignments, and if possible, some means of getting feedback and critiquing. And again, people will have their own way of handling critiquing. I've got mine when I work with people, but these are really important things that are generally missing when you look at YouTube. The next thing is in-depth coverage. So what tends to happen on a course is you're likely to go in deeper into each subject than you would necessarily on a YouTube video. Now, there are definitely YouTube videos out there that dive into particular aspects of photography and lots of other things, and they go into a lot of detail. But if you're trying to put those together as a coherent education, it can be quite difficult. You've got to do a lot of research, whereas in a course, usually those things would be set up in a logical manner that matches the whole pace of the course. So that's really important, that you get that in-depth coverage and that you do understand the important aspects of your camera, how it works, what it does. It doesn't have to be a massive understanding, but enough for you to understand how to create a particular composition, how to get a sharp subject and an out of focus background, for example, how to use lighting effectively, those kinds of things. So these are all little deep dives, and you can certainly get additional information through YouTube and using videos there. But if you're really genuinely trying to understand it, again, my opinion is that you're much better using a course. The other thing is, hopefully you'll get downloadable resources. They might be raw files, they might be worksheets, anything like that. I produce a full handbook, PDF handbook that you can download, which has everything that's in the course. And in fact, that's another thing to think of while I'm just thinking about this. It's your learning mode. And what I mean by that is, are you somebody who likes to watch videos? I had somebody working for me, a VA, and she loved videos for everything. I'm a bit older. I like a list of instructions. I don't know if it's an age thing. Maybe it is. But we all have a learning style. So for me, taking my course as an example, the DSLR, each course section goes through different videos. The number of videos varies depending on what it's covering. But also there's a full PDF handbook that has all the detail in that handbook as well. So I generally recommend people watch the video once, unless you really love watching videos, and you have the handbook there that you can print out or just use as PDF, edit it. You can edit PDFs these days, so use that how you like. But you've got those two modes of learning. And it is really important that you understand which mode works for you. I'm very visual. And I do remember I was trying to understand this a while back. I was into flying, and I was trying to understand how a jet engine worked. And I was reading the description, but it wasn't really clicking for me. And then I saw a video of it, and then it was there. I could see it all happening. So being very visual, that worked for me. You might prefer to hear things, or you might have a different mode of learning. So what are the drawbacks? The first one I've got here is cost, but yes, if you're very limited on budget, then paying for a course could definitely hurt. What I will say, though, and this relates more to coaching work that I do, and I've heard this phrase from somebody who is helping coaches, and I think it's absolutely true, though. The more we pay for something, the more value we give it ourselves. So what I mean by that, if I was to give you a complete photography course that went into absolutely everything you ever wanted to know, and I just gave it to you, would you use that course? Now, some of you will because you're genuinely interested and driven to do it, but an awful lot of people won't. They might do the first couple of lessons or first couple of modules, but then they'll peter out because they can always come back to it and it was free, so it doesn't really matter, all that sort of thing. If, on the other hand, I charged you $10,000 for a course, and I should quickly add that that's not what I charge, but if you would just pay me $10,000 for a course and that really hurts, you are much more motivated to start working that course and applying it and going through every lesson, getting every last cent of value out of what you've just invested. And there's a phrase that's used by a coaching mentor I have, because I also do coaching, and that is the transformation begins with the transaction. In other words, as soon as you've parted with money and there's some pain associated with that, that's when you start to change and start moving towards the outcome you want. If what I've just given you, you have for free, there's no transaction there as such, so there's no transformation. So I think cost could be a barrier, but I believe there's an important aspect to it in terms of motivation. Courses may be less entertaining than videos, but maybe they need to be. I think courses need to be engaging, but that's more down to the style of whoever is presenting the information being a style that you can get along with. They don't necessarily need to be that entertaining, but you just need to be able to get them. It's just about getting knowledge from one person to another. And there's also time and attention has to be committed when you're on a structured course. So again, the approach I've taken is to keep these modules short, about 20 minutes, because we all have lives going on, and if I would say, well, here's the next lesson, it's 5 hours, you're probably not going to get too excited about that. Whereas if I say, well, it's 20 minutes, you can fit that in between, I don't know what goes on in your life, taking kids to school, or, getting maybe a lunch break at work, or whatever it might be for you. So there is a need to commit time and attention, but it's down to what can you commit and what is reasonable for you to be able to expect to do. Don't get unreasonable in your expectations, but if you are realistic about what you can achieve, then you should get a much better outcome. Okay, so just to quickly, summarize, if we're looking at them side by side, so the first thing is learning speed and retention. YouTube, fast learning, but it's a bit shallower. Courses tend to be slower, but generally deeper, so you'll get more in-depth knowledge. So again, it's down to your learning style to some extent. The skill development, it's really down to which path leads to a measurable improvement in what you're doing. So if you've got a good course, there should be aspects to that where you can measure your results. You can definitely see an improvement. And one of the ways that I measure where you're at when I'm looking at students' work or coaching people, it's to look at how consistent you are. Because one of the most important things, I believe, is to get consistent first. Now, it doesn't matter if your level of consistency is pretty awful, but once you're consistent and you can keep producing the same result, that means that you generally know how you got that result. And then what you can do is just take one aspect of your photography at a time and start to improve that. And what will happen over time is that gradually your level of photography and your ability will raise. It will still remain consistent, but you'll be consistent at a higher level. And that consistency is really important. Otherwise, it's just kind of flukes. If you got a shot, but you really don't know how you got it, yeah, that's not knowing how to use your camera. That's just luck. So what's the overall value for different learners? So if you're a hobbyist, you've got to answer that yourself, because some people don't really care, or it may even be that you only use the camera once a year when you go on a holiday, and maybe you're happy in auto mode or just using your smartphone, and that's good enough. In that case, no, I would not recommend anything for you. If you've achieved the level that you want, you're there. If you're a hobbyist or somebody who's more interested in photography, and something I believe is very true about photography is that you're constantly learning. So new things come out. Obviously, technology certainly changed significantly in the time I've been doing photography, but also styles change. You get new photographers come along who've got a different take on doing particular types of photography. So we're always learning, and I think even if you regard yourself as a hobbyist, for me, when I was a hobbyist, I was always learning. I was always interested. I was always reading. I'd take courses. I'd do whatever, and then gradually got much more serious, which takes us on to the more serious beginner. And frankly, I believe once you get to that point, you need structure. You need to do a structured course, because it becomes that much more important that you have that basic foundation, that grounding. You understand the basics of what the camera is, basically how it works. You don't need to know all the detail, but you need to know definitely exposure triangle is a basic. If you don't understand exposure triangle, and I say this a lot, then you will never be able to use the full creative potential of your camera and yourself. You can imagine a result, but you don't know how to get there. So anyone from a serious beginner to, if you're getting more serious, you want to be professional, in my opinion, it's important to not only do a really good basic photography course, but also do a more niche course. So, for example, I've worked with an upmarket photographer. I did a course with her on upmarket portraits and weddings. I've also trained as a photojournalist, because I'm very interested in how you use, how we tell stories using pictures. So that's just a couple of examples of things where I've invested fair amount of money in both cases, actually. So it's obviously your call what you choose to do, but to get good, I believe you have to invest in yourself. And it's not just about taking a course, but it's actually about making that financial commitment almost as an exchange of energy, if you want to think about it that way. you're giving something of yourself to this person who's going to teach you, because it's a measure of your commitment to yourself. However many dollars, pounds, whatever you've just spent, that's a measure of how committed you are to moving your photography on. Okay, so where do you take it from here? Probably the best place to go, I would suggest, is to do a combination of both. Again, I don't know where you're at. You need to make that call. But I think for most of us, it ends up being a sort of blended approach. We might lean more heavily towards the course side or maybe the YouTube side, but we'll definitely be dipping into the other one from time to time. And in doing that, we get different ideas. We come across different styles. We get those little questions answered that perhaps it's a more detailed question that wasn't covered in a general course. So in my opinion, again, probably the outcome for most of us will be a combination, but I do certainly recommend that if you haven't done a photography course before, you think about taking one. So what would be scenarios? Well, if it's someone with zero budget, what I would suggest you do, obviously you're going to look at the YouTube part first, but I would do what I could, maybe do some Googling and actually get my questions lined up. So what are the things you really need to understand before you can start getting further with your photography? What would give you, how can you create your own basic grounding, a basic foundation by asking the right questions? So it's not always easy, again, because you don't know what you don't know. And this is really where a structured course comes in. But if you can't afford it, you can't afford it. So it's about how do you move forward. If you're a beginner who really wants to learn photography, then I absolutely recommend that you take a basic course. And that's where mine starts, and there are lots of others out there. But the important thing is it gives you that basic foundation. That's the key thing. And from there, you can grow, you can specialize, you can all do all the things we all do as photographers. We start to dive into niches. If you're a working photographer and you're refining a specialization, then, as I've said, you probably want to look at a higher level course in the area that you want to specialize in and start to go into that in a lot more detail. So I've mentioned a few that I've done. Or you might just be somebody struggling with YouTube overwhelm, and it's quite understandable because you might be getting frustrated. You're trying to understand how to do a certain thing. You ask a question, you get videos come up, they're sponsored, they don't answer your question. You do another search, you get a different one, which also doesn't answer the question. If you get into that mode, then if you are early on in learning photography, I would absolutely recommend that you take a course rather than try and keep fighting with YouTube. What will happen as you get to know your photography, your questions will get better. I'll put it that way. So you'll be clearer and you can be perhaps technically more specific about what you want to know. And that will help to guide you to the right resource to hopefully answer your question. So that is pretty much it for this podcast. As I said at the start, I am very interested to know what you think, if you've taken courses, if you do take courses, what sort of courses you find useful. I have run workshops. I will be running more workshops now that I'm in the process of settling back into Sydney. So there will be live and online courses coming up. So that's a watch this space. But I'm always interested to hear what people would like to have delivered in terms of both the course. Do you prefer a single hit over half a day or even a full day, or do you prefer it spaced out? All those kinds of things. So do please let me know. That's it. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to like and subscribe if you think I've earned it. And you can even buy me a coffee if you jump on the website. Thanks again. I'll speak to you in the next podcast. Bye for now. Oh, and one thing just before you go, please take a look at the 2026 wildlife calendar. That's available now. It's on the website. There's a link below the description of this podcast episode. So please take a look, and I'll speak to you next time. Bye now.